Here to join us on the program is good friend of the show, longtime friend of the show, Tyrel Ventura.
Thank you guys for having me on. Always a pleasure. Pretty incredible day for us Minnesotans. It's been a very, very, very long time. I mean, I think not back since the Humphrey days of the '60s did we suddenly have, or I guess my dad, but like not since the Humphrey days of the '60s that we suddenly had a governor, a politician from Minnesota be kind of making national waves the way Tim Walz has, and it's a good day to be a Minnesotan. Anytime you see a leader or governor get kind of lifted up and say, "Hey, we want you, a heartbeat away from the biggest office in the land," that's a hell of a honor, and it says a lot about the people of Minnesota, and it says a lot about Tim Walz.
Totally, 100% agree, Tyrel. Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate hearing your reaction to this pretty crazy news. I was telling Zach, I personally believe that Tim Walz is the best vice presidential pick of my entire life. You look through vice presidential picks in the last 26 years, there's not a lot of real good ones in the mix. They usually tend to be safe picks. They usually tend to be bland picks, people like Tim Kaine or Mike Pence, Joe Biden, right? Tim Walz, I think, actually represents a form of populism that should be at the forefront of the Democratic Party. And one of the original things that kind of cued me, to realize the fact that Walz was significantly more populist than your average Democrat was the fact that your father, Tyrel, former Governor Jesse Ventura, actually endorsed Tim Walz in 2020, despite the fact that Jesse Ventura, of course, won as an independent third-party candidate back in the 90s and has traditionally only endorsed third-party candidates and independent candidates. Tim Walz became the first duopoly candidate that Jesse Ventura actually said, I think this guy should be the governor once again. I think it's worth it for me to put my weight, my name, my credibility and reputation behind him because he's going to get the job done and he's going to do the right thing for the people of Minnesota. That included his legalization of cannabis, big win for Minnesota. Do you want to, tell our audience a little bit more about what went into that decision-making process and what Walz has actually delivered since that endorsement?
Of course, yes. It was one of those things that when Walz, way back when before his second term, when he first got elected to his first term, my father had no interaction with him. He didn't know him or anything like that, but he called my dad, Governor Ventura, out of the blue right after he had won and after he had kind of assumed office, and asked him to come down to the Capitol. And he was the only governor since my dad was governor from 99 to 2003. And this is, I think, 6 years ago now. He's been the only governor, there's been about 2 or 3 in between, to ever reach out to my dad to ask him for advice for, as from one governor to another. You govern the state, what should I, what good pointers do you have? And he picked my dad's brain and was very, treated my dad with honor, and really wanted to learn from him. And that's never happened before. So when Governor Walz reached out in his reelection bid and reached out to Jesse to say, hey, would you consider endorsing me? Looking at his track record and looking at how he led and what kind of guy he is, and also knowing that he, because he met with not just Jesse but other people as well in that time. But it really spoke a lot to Jesse about that, and he knew that Walz is a good leader. I've met with him a few times since then. Walz he's one of those rare politicians that, though he is part of the kind of Democratic mess, the Democrat Party mess over there, he still leads from his heart, and I think he's one of those kind of rare guys. And he was also served in Washington too, so I was going to say, I hope Washington doesn't destroy the man. But he was actually
in Congress.
A leader in Congress, so he
Right.
does have familiarity with the DC dog and pony show.
And he got more progressive after coming out of DC. After becoming governor, I feel like he governed to the left of how he legislated in the Congress.
He was also a big anti-war guy. We were talking about how he was instrumental in pushing Obama to the left on Syria, towards peace on Syria. He was like, guys, and in a way that I think your father always did a great job of doing, saying, hey, I've been in the belly of the beast, man. We can't just throw people around and put them in there. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. Gavin and I have talked about how he threads the needle well between being like a Midwestern populist, a farmer populist, a guy that your father could get along with. Jesse was never a Democrat in his entire life, but there's enough overlap that people who would typically tune out American politics, feeling like there's no home for them, can at least have an olive branch extended to them when it comes to freedom issues. Like Tim Walz is never coming for your guns. He's a proud hunter. He believes in sportsmanship. He believes in protecting your home. He's not going to tell you that you can't smoke weed. He legalized weed in Minnesota. I think he would push Kamala Harris to the left on that. Would love to get your 2 cents on if we are going to see legalized cannabis at the federal level if Kamala Harris and Tim Walz go to the White House. These kinds of more, dare I say, libertarian populist, libertarian left positions that could win over swing voters, win over people who may have voted for Trump in 2016 and voted for nobody in 2020?
Yes, no, he easily could, because look, Minnesota is one of those states where you do have a very, massive distinction between how, for lack of a better term, the people in the cities vote and the people in the countries vote. But ultimately we are it's still a very liberal state. It always has been. But to your point of like, it's liberal with shades of libertarianism, also definitely deeply rooted into it. It's only recently that we've kind of seen more of that kind of Christian nationalist type voting bloc that is like the Donald Trump MAGA heads kind of rise up in the state. But ultimately, Tim is able to bridge those gaps because Tim was born, in the country. He's not a city guy. He's a school teacher. He knows every type of parent you could possibly imagine and had to deal with their kids and had to deal with them. And like I said, I can't stress enough to you that even if you disagree with Tim Walz's policies, even if you say, oh man, that guy, I don't like where he stands on this, the very real fact that I've seen in my experience with him is that he leads with what he believes in as opposed to what he's told to believe in. He leads with like, no, I think this is a good idea because I believe in it, rather than, well, my benefactor told me I'm supposed to vote this way, or this, pack over here. And let's give the man credit. He was able to do what here in Minnesota, what we've been screaming for the national, congressional Democrats on the federal level to do for years when they've had the majority. And Tim was able to do this with a 1-seat majority in the House and the Senate here in Minnesota, and was able to get all of these major progressive things that people have been fighting for a long time passed. Why? Because he is a fighter at the end of the day too. He's not afraid to stand up for what he believes in. No, I think it's a brilliant pick by Harris. Will Tim be watered down as vice president? That's a good question to ask. How much sway will he have over the administration? Who knows? But I think at the end of the day, I think Harris made a really savvy pick. We hope that Tim will have the ear of the White House, as vice president. Maybe Tim will become like the Democrats' version, like the good version of Dick Cheney, and like take over and run things.
Yeah. Right before he came on, I said he could be the left's Dick Cheney, actually running the show, because Harris has no ideology. She's an empty vessel, but he can actually assert his agenda for the people.
Yeah,
you could who knows? I mean, the future is wide open, but I think ultimately. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, not to cut you off. I was just going to add, as more of a foreign policy analyst, do you have any specific thoughts on how the Harris-Walz administration would potentially govern in that capacity?
Ooh, it's going to be up in the air. I know Walz has taken a few shots for certain stances he's had on like the Israel-Gaza situation, like in the years back, but I also know Walz to be a fair guy, and I think he can recognize a genocide when he sees one. He's not going to like kind of gloss over that. I think he can recognize like, how do you find peace in places like that? As far as the Walz-Harris foreign policy thing, I mean, thank God he's there, and thank God he spoke out against Syria. Will his voice get lost in the shuffle in Washington when the war machine clicks its boots and says we're moving forward? Probably, tragically. But I don't think I think Walz is smart enough to where if he can't make the change directly, I bet he'll probably do what he can to kind of backdoor and change it, behind the scenes. Or at least I hope he could, because he is a guy who has conviction, I believe stands by his convictions. I mean, I've seen that time and again in Minnesota. And, I'm not just a fan because him and my dad get along. I'm a fan because I've seen the progress he's made in the state. And so as vice president, you don't have, as vice president, you can be a tiebreaker in the House and Senate too. You can cast that deciding vote. So Walz will have his moments to shine, and I really hope that he does. Foreign policy wise, though, with Kamala Harris and all them, man, I don't want to make any predictions until I see how they do it, because how quickly Harris doesn't strike me as someone who's going to be who's not going to be afraid to use the war machine. I mean, I'm just being honest. She doesn't strike me as that person who's going to be timid when it comes to things like that. But at the same time, you always have to maintain a level of hope. You got to see what they actually do in office before you can jump to the conclusion that, oh, they're going to be a warmonger, or, oh, they're going to be a peacenik. Wait and see what their decision making is, because you never know. You never know. Maybe we could all be surprised and suddenly, hey, they usher in some great ideas and pull us out of some bad quagmires. You never know. But that's on us to keep their feet to the fire ultimately and make sure that they don't just become victims of the military-industrial complex.
Right. Another thing we were just talking about, Tyrel, before you joined, was some of the Republican and MAGA reactions to this pick. People hilariously going with the line now that Tim Walz is a radical liberal, a crazy lefty, which is funny to me and a big mistake, in my opinion, on the part of the right, because they're basically taking an incredibly effective governor, someone that's really popular in his home state, was reelected, and is, like I said, really just effective. So I think people want politicians to be effective. I think they want their representatives to represent them. And this guy has seemingly unambiguously improved the state of Minnesota via his leadership. He's actually passed policies, signed bills that are good and that are popular and that he was elected to sign and to pass. So, do you think that this attack is going to stick at all? And within Minnesota, does Walz have a reputation of being some, radical liberal or something? Or is he just thought of as an effective governor?
The thing is that they're throwing like those kind of shots across the bow at Walz, it's really just feeding their own base. It's just so they can score points with the people who already don't like him. You're not gonna, Walz is not like a crazed, left-wing nutbag. He makes decisions that might be unpopular with the right until they see them in action. Because I guarantee you that while, hey, free school, he passed free school lunches, right? Well, every right-wing politician, oh my God, we don't want free school lunches. Like, what kind of handouts are we talking about here? But yet that their kids are getting them and they're really happy not to have to pay for their kids' lunches anymore or make them in the morning. So it's one of those things where it's like once they see the policies take root and take effect, then it's, oh, well, I guess it's not so bad.
And not to cut you off,
I'll say something shitty at a party, but I'm secretly behind the doors going, oh, thank God Walz did that.
Yeah, and I think, not to cut you off again, but specifically with the lunch one, it's super powerful because what are the right-wingers, specifically J.D. Vance, what are they talking about constantly? Families. We're the pro-family party. We love family values. We're going to put family values first in the White House. Yeah, bullshit. Tim Walz has actually put family values first in Minnesota. That's why he signed that bill. That's why he's governed the way he has. And I think people are going to recognize that. I mean, how are you going to attack a guy like Tim Walz as anti-family? Regardless of how you feel about his politics, you could be a boomer Republican. I think you're still going to get just a sense that this guy is a real person. He's a genuine guy and he's a family man.
Yeah, that's what keeps him that's what kept him winning Minnesota, despite, like I said, a lot of the outstate, when you get outside the metro area in the Twin Cities, is very Republican or at least very heavy libertarian, and that's what kept him winning in that, is that when you do see him speak and you hear his conviction and his genuineness, and that, okay, but this guy is from a rural background. He does know what, if we kind of divide it up and say, okay, look, most Republicans are, across the country are coming from rural states, or, not the big coast, not the liberal elite coast, as they say. Walz still has an appeal there because that's where his roots are. That's where he, before he was a politician, that's where he lived. That's what he was doing, was living and working in those areas. And he represented those areas as a politician before he even became governor, so I think with everything, you just have to see what, before everyone says, oh my God, that's a liberal policy and it's going to end the world. Once you see the policy in effect, then you suddenly say, oh, I guess it wasn't that bad.
Well, I think we can see that across the board with Democratic policies, right?
Yes.
It's always going to be catastrophic. Go back in time to Social Security. Oh, it was going to end the world. Oh, go back to Obamacare. Obamacare is not perfect. Gavin and I will argue about if it's even worth, celebrating in any capacity, but try taking it away from people. Go ahead and run your presidential campaign against the Affordable Care Act. It is a lifeline for people. Now, should it be more robust? Of course, but you can't run against attacking it in the same way that the Republicans are going to lean towards, like, oh, we're the pro-family party. This guy codified Roe v. Wade into law. And everybody's going to be like, actually, dude, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good thing he did that. I'm a libertarian. Might lean Republican, but You know, I kind of agree with him on that. You know what I mean? Or
Exactly.
You know,
and I have one thing to say about Walz, and I've met a lot of politicians in my life, tragically. You know, something I'm not proud of. I've met a lot of politicians
You
in
met
my
George
life.
Bush one time. You told
I
us that
did.
story.
I did. I met the Dalai Lama and George Bush within like 2 weeks of each other. You talk about a yin and yang of you know. But no, I've met a lot of politicians in my life, and I've always been able to sniff out your real diabolical me first politicians. When at the end of meeting them, they always say, "Call me if I can ever do anything for you. Call me." Right? Every like real sleazy politician or someone who I didn't know to be sleazy, but then turned out to be sleazy, always ended the conversation like, you know, give my office a call if I can ever do anything for you. Let me know if you ever need anything, you know, that kind of thing. Tim Walz has never done that to me. You know, Tim Walz is one of those guys who never ends a conversation with, what can I do for you? So that, you know, he is just that guy that says, you know, awesome, great meeting you. Thank you so much. You know, he didn't come across as shady. And
not
look,
Don Corleone.
no, you know, and look, in today's day and age, man, even if you disagree with 50% of what he may stand for, 60% of what he may stand for, because I can honestly say he leads from his own convictions and his heart. And I keep harping on that because it's important, because we don't get that in today's politician today. We rarely see that on a federal level, let alone at a vice presidential level. So, you know, I think we're hopefully going to be in a good place with this guy. I hope that he can kind of keep the Kamala, if they win, or the Kamala, you know, if they win, if he can keep that administration from veering too hard to the corporate left and to the Hillary Clinton wing of the party, and he can kind of act as that balance to at least kind of keep a certain amount of integrity there, then we've won. I think that's a good win for progressives.
I think her also inheriting something we haven't talked about, which is the labor initiatives of Joe Biden. I think if we're going to give credit to Joe Biden, we can give him credit over one thing, and that's his response to labor. That's his NLRB as president. That's the fact that he was the first sitting American president to join a picket line, right? Low bar to clear, in my opinion, but it's something that he did, and it's a standard he set for his administration. And now you have Tim Walz, another guy who, in the line of service, not while he was in the military or anything, but as a public servant, he was standing on the picket line. Sean Fain tweeted out, "Hey, thank you. We support this guy. This is our guy. He's been with us." Right? Sean Fain, the good president. Sean O'Brien, the bad Sean. He's with the Republicans. We won't get into that, but I think that Tim Walz is so good on labor that it's going to force Kamala to at least be, you know, open to it. Like the woman that's in charge of the FEC right now that they're actively coming against. I think it's a good, you know, if I was her, I would still be. What's her name?
Lena Khan.
Lena Khan. Yeah. If I were her, I'd be sweating a little bit less if I were, you know, working towards the Ticketmaster Live Nation breakup. I would be still enthused about it, right? I don't think we're going to get net neutrality threats again under a Walz Harris ticket. I think that's good, given the fact that Harris's biggest red flag to me was her insane corporatism and her willingness to play ball with Silicon Valley. I mean, there's only one way to rise up in California politics, and that is to, you know, bend over a barrel and grab your ankles for Silicon Valley. You have to be totally awash in their cash. I guess I shouldn't probably use that language for the first female presidential candidate or VP, but you know what I'm saying? That's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. And non-gendered expression.
No, that's the thing. It's, you know, it's interesting seeing this because, hey, you guys, I got to take credit. I'm going to shine my own head and talk about how great I am. I predicted this to a degree, about 6 months ago on the Vanguard, when I said that they were going to swap out Biden at some point, probably before the convention.
You've been saying this for a while.
Yeah, I didn't predict Harris. Because I figured, you know, they would move on from like the old administration. So this is kind of an interesting choice. I think you're exactly right. You know, if Walz can be that person to balance out that ticket, then we're in for a really interesting 4 years if they beat Trump. And that's the big question. Can these two beat Donald Trump and J.D. Vance? And I think that it's a pretty for a Democratic ticket. Given their choices the last few years and the last few elections, this is a pretty powerful ticket.
I'm forecasting at least 300. I'm forecasting at least 300. I'm getting our takeout early. I'm letting everybody know. I'm thinking ass whooping for Donald Trump.
There it is. I have that feeling too. I don't think you're far from the truth. I have that feeling too. I have that feeling too, because look, it ain't Donald Trump of 2016. When he can run without a record, then everyone, ooh, let me try him out. He has a record now, and apart from his very specific base that is cult Trump, is he going to appeal to undecideds? Is he going to appeal to independents at this point in time? I think probably had it ended with just Trump and Biden, I think you would have probably seen the least turnout in federal election history. I don't think anyone would have come out to vote. But now that you got Harris, and then we're saying, okay, we're going to go with Walz. Well, that's galvanizing. That gets people excited. The mainstream Democrats are never going to be popular in the far left circles. God love our activist brothers and sisters who are out there fighting that fight. They're never going to be, because they're still tied to that corporate machinery. But you have to still look for who can at least move the needle a few inches your way on a few important topics. It might not be everything, but I think we could do a lot worse as far as corporate Democrats go than a Harris Walz ticket. At the end of the day, we could have been facing down the barrel of some pretty shitty choices.
100%.
So the fact that we get this, I think, is a pretty good sign, and take it and run with it, because the alternative sucks. By all means, still vote independent if that's your belief system. I'll never stop pounding that horse. But it's a solid ticket. There's a lot of problems there, but at least with Walz, I know that it's someone you can work with. I don't know about Harris, but at least with Walz, I know it's someone who will listen, and someone who will fight for the little guy, and will fight for what you're talking about, unions, labor, things like that. I don't think he'll give up his beliefs just because he's vice president, because he never struck me as a guy who was trying to achieve vice president. He never struck me as someone who, I wanted that top spot. He didn't. I don't think he was a guy with that ambition.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I think that might have been part of the reason why Harris picked him. She felt like this isn't someone who's trying to steal the spotlight, a Josh Shapiro career climber, someone who's super ambitious and just wants this for their own self-gratification. I totally agree with that. Although I do also think that Tim Walz could become president himself if the occasion called for it. Obviously, I mean, not anything crazy, but
let's remember this about Tim. When he ran for governor the first time, he was not endorsed by the Democrats. He primaried the endorsed Democrat and got the nomination by primarying him and getting it. The mainstream Democrat Party did not endorse him when he ran the first time round. Yeah. So he is truly that outside guy, even from that party.
Speaking of, can you explain a little bit about the Democratic Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota and his connection to that?
Yeah, so the DFL is essentially like the as far as I know, and look, I'm not the expert on the inner workings of the Democratic Party, and I've always been an independent, so you're probably asking the wrong person. But from what I understand, the DFL is essentially the wing of the Democratic Party, but within Minnesota, it is its own kind of like offshoot of the Democrats. But it's still ultimately, the mainstream Democratic Party. It's they answer to the same people at the end of the day, but it's just the Minnesota version of it at the end of the day.
I just feel like a lot of people that aren't from Minnesota are kind of confused about the.
Yeah, but no, the DFL, I mean, it's a little bit older. It's why is Minnesota a little more progressive? Because of the DFL. Its ranks are filled with much more progressives than it is, than a lot of other.
Kind of like the Working Families Party. Is that kind of akin to that?
It's similar. Yeah, but old, man. DFL been around forever. Like this is one of those. This is one of those kind of things. But no. I mean, he didn't get the DFL's endorsement when he ran for his first term as governor. He had the primary, and he won it off the will of the people. So, if that tells you something about where he stands within the Democratic Party, he is an outsider. But he also knows how to balance.
He's definitely an outsider. He likes to get things done, right? One of the things that I think will be really effective for him is that he'll be able to say that he did build back better in his own state. And I think that was a huge part of it. You guys mentioned the fact that it was the blatant careerism that kind of kneecapped Josh Shapiro. I mean, that was one of the reasons I was so convinced that it was going to be Josh Shapiro, was because everybody in East Coast political offices was being told that it was going to be Shapiro, but they were just being told that by each other. It was like a rumor, essentially. And John Fetterman was like, this guy's a fucking careerist. And Kamala Harris was like, I smell a careerist. And it took the oxygen away from him. Otherwise, I think there is an outcome where Josh Shapiro, if he'd played his cards better, is the VP. Thank God that's not the case. Thank God we have a Midwesterner and somebody that the American people can just relate to. Tyrel, you were an independent. Gavin and I are, progressive lefties. We've all voted differently probably, but I think we can all say this is a guy that makes us believe in the American institution. It's kind of like when your father ran for governor, right? The fact that your father won meant something to people who had, 50% political disagreements with him, because it showed that you could still be an American who looked at the fucking, landscape and said, I want to change it. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to try and reach people, and I'm going to, put out the call that they'll answer. And then they did, right? Walt is a guy, half of his, graduating class were his cousins or whatever the hell. You know what I mean? He makes his way all the way up as a teacher. He's a high school football coach, a defensive coordinator, not a glamorous job, high school coaching, but he did it because he loved the kids. And you can see it too when he's sitting in the lunchroom and all the kids run up and hug the guy. He's a real guy. That's what the Americans want to vote for. And that's what we want to see more of in politics. We'll make excuses for a lot of the rest.
Exactly. And that's the thing here. It's easy because we're so cynical these days to be like, well, how much of it is photo op politicians? How much is it are the politicians who, have the cute background, but really weren't invested in it and did things for career opportunities like Shapiro, like the Hillary Clintons of the world, people like that. Walz isn't, from everything everyone can be surprised. And maybe he turns out to be the biggest corporate, do-gooder of all,
Gavin and I will go network live on air.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I don't foresee that happening in any real world situation, but he does, like I said, I can't speak highly enough of him and highly enough of his integrity for really standing by what he believes is the right thing to do. And anytime, that's what got my dad elected, is that even if, like I've said it before, and I keep pounding home, even if you disagree with him on 50% of how he believes and how he operates, that it's coming from him and it's not coming from strings and puppet masters behind his back. Tim is who he says he is and stands up for his convictions and his beliefs, which, look, at the end of the day, that's all you can ask for, and that's so refreshing. And I think that's why this is suddenly a refreshing ticket. And look, we can even say this says a lot about Harris. She's the one that ultimately picks him. Unless there was a committee we don't know about making the decision for her, as far as what we know, she picked him. So this says a lot about her decision making too. And it speaks very highly of her. And I think it's going to drive the right nuts, because now you have her and Walz, and Walz consistently beats right wing candidates. He beat a very big time Republican opponent who was running with an ex-Minnesota Viking as his lieutenant governor slot, and Walz beat that guy last time around.
And
so,
Peggy,
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to add his lieutenant governor, Peggy. I forget her last name. She's a Native American woman. She would be the first Native governor of Minnesota. Awesome. My sister worked for her, speaks very highly of her. It's a win-win. You get to keep a progressive Democrat in the gubernatorial office, and Peggy Flanigan. Thank you, Gavin, for looking that up.
Yep. And that's another cool thing about this. If Shapiro had gotten the vice presidential spot, that means a Republican actually would have become governor of Pennsylvania. The lieutenant governor of PA was actually a Republican, right? Luckily for Minnesota, at least, Peggy Flanigan is their lieutenant governor, your lieutenant governor, Tyrel. So, yeah, what's your opinion on Peggy?
Oh, Peggy's great. Peggy, again, is another great lieutenant governor and is representative of how Walz chooses people and how Walz runs his administration. From the top down, he's always picked really good people. I'm really excited by the fact that now we have her as our governor. If they win, and they make the White House, it's going to be a really amazing thing for her to be our governor. It's historic. We've never had a female governor in the history of the state of Minnesota. And so it's nothing but good. I mean, look, I will say it hurts because Walz is such a good governor. You hate to see him go. But Peggy, I think, Flanigan's going to be able to step into his shoes and step into his chair and really, I think, do a lot of good for the state of Minnesota at the end of the day. Because again, I think, another person with integrity, I hope, who will lead with integrity and lead based on what they believe in and stick to it and not be pressured by interest groups, special interest groups, all of that. So, we'll see we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, and Walz would be termed out, right, after the conclusion of this term. Am I correct?
No. Because he won, I think, 2 years ago. So he still has another 2 years to go. At least one more year.
Right.
Yeah.
But after that, I mean, after the conclusion
of
that.
After that, I believe the governor, you can keep going and go. I don't believe there's term limits on Minnesota governor.
Gotcha.
I don't think.
Never mind then. I know some states are.
Some states do. I don't believe you do in Minnesota. I think you can kind of be governor for at least 3 terms, because I think we've had that before.
Okay, gotcha. I know
yeah.
people were saying with Andy Bashir, I think he's at the end of his second term and that he wasn't able to run for another. So I thought that might be the same with Walz, but I could see it being different state by state. Either way, at least, the next in line is seemingly going to be a suitable replacement. But yeah, thank you so much, Tyrel, for joining us today. If you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share or anything you'd like to let our audience know about, feel free to do so. But we really appreciated your insights.
You asked me earlier, do you think that this will expedite the federal legalization of marijuana? I think Walz, he worked very hard to make sure that happened in the state of Minnesota. I think, and for very good reasons as to why. And so I think you're exactly right. I think if they win, you're going to see that federal legalization pass very quickly, because I think there will be pressure to do it because, again, of not only the benefits it does, but also the economic impact it has. And I think that Walz did a lot. He studied, and the people behind those bills worked very hard to make sure that the bill in Minnesota didn't fall into the same mistakes that other legalization bills did across the country. They're never perfect, but I know that Walz worked very hard to try to make sure that it was as best as it could be. So at least I know that I would love it if they put Walz in charge of legalization across the country, because I know he's going to approach it with the right ideas. Will that happen? I don't know, but it'd be awesome if they did.
Yes, donors of the world, rejoice. We found our candidate. We're going to be going balls to the walls for legal cannabis, everybody. Tyrel, thank you so much for your time, as always.
Thank you, everybody. Peace to you.